want to make this clear. The National Guard will come back under my authority by noon tomorrow. The National Guard will be redeployed to what they were doing before Donald Trump commandeered them. The National Guard will go back to border security, working on counter-drug enforcement and fentanyl enforcement, which they were taken off by Donald Trump. The National Guard will go back to working on what we refer to as the rattlesnake teams, doing vegetation and forest management, which Donald Trump took them off in preparation for wildfire season. The National Guard, men and women, will go back to their day jobs, which include law enforcement, that he took them off the job.
You want to see a masterclass in political gaslighting? You're about to see it right now, because breaking news, ladies and gentlemen, California Governor Gavin Newsom has just lost to the Trump administration in federal court yet again. Except according to Gavin Newsom, so out of touch with reality here, guys, he is going out and claiming that he won. That he won, despite the fact that clearly, I mean, if you don't believe me, Google the headlines, read them from liberal outlets if you want. Everyone is unanimously pointing out here that the appeals court is blocking Gavin Newsom and siding here with President Trump on the very idea to deploy the National Guard to the city of Los Angeles, right? This is a situation, of course, also taking place in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which was famously once known as the San Francisco liberal judge stronghold. And, the court has changed in the past couple of years. But nonetheless, Gavin Newsom is getting defeated on the judicial level because it turns out, as a matter of fact, despite all of the left-wing hysteria, despite the constant boy who cried wolf effect, the decision to deploy the Guard to Los Angeles was frankly pretty common sense and backed on strong basis of rationale and justification and things that were clearly here happening. That is also what our federal judiciary is saying. Gavin Newsom apparently now wants to appeal to the Supreme Court, I'm told, which I'm not sure is going to go much better than him, on that front, but he continues to make a fool out of himself, and we'll tell you about the situation here today, not just with the court ruling itself, but the Newsom reaction to the situation, because again, guys, I cannot believe, ladies and gentlemen, he actually had the nerve to go out and say this, because he is utterly humiliated, okay? It turns out, this was not martial law, this was not an illegal deployment, actually, it was fully justified here, but that's not the way he sees it. So with that said, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy the content as usual, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We are very close here to 500,000 subscribers. Subscribing is the best way to not only support us, but it also ensures that you stay up to date with all the latest news and coverage. And with that said, I come out here today and I see this tweet on the timeline from Mr. Gavin Newsom. As you can see right here. He says, Donald Trump is not a king and not above the law. Tonight, the court rightly rejected Trump's claim that he can do whatever he wants with a National Guard and not have to explain himself to a court. We will not let this authoritarian use of military soldiers against citizens go unchecked. Okay. So you read that comment there, and you probably are thinking to yourself, okay, so it sounds like he won the case, right? It sounds like you would at least think that means Gavin Newsom beat Trump on this legal battle over the National Guard. After all, he says, the court rejected Trump's claim he can do whatever he wants and not have to explain himself. Except you scroll down here, as pointed out by many people, the headlines are saying the opposite, right? The appeals court is actually blocking Gavin Newsom's bid to reclaim control of the National Guard from Donald Trump. By the way, this court consists here of 2 Trump appointees, yes, but also 1 Biden appointee ruled unanimously in Donald Trump's favor that he did indeed have the authority to federalize the National Guard and deploy them to Los Angeles, which of course begs a very simple question here. What planet is Gavin Newsom living on? I mean, I know certain leaves are legal in California, but I mean, that's just totally, what are you talking about, right? So look, we know Gavin Newsom, this is his professional shtick. I mean, that's what he's very good at, right? Seeming like a moderate, sensible, compassionate, common sense governor when he's, of course, not only one of the most far left guys in the entire country, but completely failed in his job. But with that said, okay, let us actually tell you what happened in this case that, again, Gavin Newsom is claiming is a victory because, I don't know, the court's made a decision. This is how the rule of law is supposed to work. Okay, but you lost. You lost and you're claiming you won. So as you can see, let's read from the New York Times here, right? Let's specifically go from a left-wing outlet. As you can see, An appeals court has let Donald Trump keep control of the National Guard in California, in Los Angeles. This panel has rejected a lower court's finding that it was likely illegal for President Trump to use state troops to protect immigration agents from those protests. And by the way, even that lower court, who was a Bill Clinton appointee, did give Trump the necessary time to basically keep them there for the few days that was necessary to quell the riots. So the situation you continue to see here for Gavin Newsom is basically legal defeat after legal defeat on this National Guard issue. But again, guys, they want to keep hammering it home. So as you can see, here's the story. So on Thursday night, a federal appeals court has cleared the way for President Trump to keep using the National Guard to respond to immigration protests in Los Angeles, declaring that a judge in San Francisco erred last week when he ordered Mr. Trump to return control of the Guard troops to Gavin Newsom of California. In a unanimous 38-page ruling, a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit held that the conditions in Los Angeles were sufficient for Mr. Trump to decide that he needed to take federal control of California's National Guard and deploy it to ensure that federal immigration laws would be enforced. And again, back at the time, what did I say? It is a fairly common sense decision. Because yes, there are riots, there are obvious, of violence going on in the streets, number one, but also number two, let's also not forget here that the primary point of the deployment of the Guard troops was to protect federal buildings where you had rioters storming in the Friday, the first day it all went down. They did break into the parking lot. They were destroying vehicles and stuff. We saw them throwing rocks and stuff, harassing the officers. Obviously, there's a very real need for that. And by the way, at the same time, not only does LAPD not have the situation under control, but let us also not forget, you had literally the Los Angeles police chief admitting that when it came to the general situation, which by the way includes LAPD's officers' ability to protect ICE or whatever, they did not have the situation under control either. And let's also keep in mind, Karen Bass wants to maintain LA's sanctuary city status, which of course means they're not going to use law enforcement officers in most capacities to protect the feds from violence. So it really begged the question, what other option did we have? What did we expect to happen? Let us not forget this, guys. While Gavin Newsom was saying the situation was totally under control, LAPD had it fine, LAPD themselves were saying, no, we do not.
We saw the first night was bad. What we've seen subsequent to that is getting increasingly worse and more violent. Tonight we had individuals out there shooting commercial-grade fireworks at our officers. That can kill you. And we have adapted our tactics to be able to have a chance to be able to take these people into custody and to be able to hold them accountable. We are overwhelmed as far as the number of people out there engaged in this type of activity and the type of things that they're doing. They'll take backpacks, and the backpack will have a cinder block in it. They have a hammer, and they'll break up the cinder block and use that, pass it around to throw at officers, to throw at cars, and throw at other people. We've seen people with hammers, and you broadcast it, breaking the bollards behind the federal building and taking the rocks, if you will, or pieces of concrete, and throwing them at officers. We've had liquid of who knows what description thrown at officers. There's no limit to what they're doing to our officers. And again, as I mentioned in my statement, I can't thank our folks enough and our partner agency police officials for going out there and taking care of the community.
Right. So again, there was ample reason, there was ample justification. It made perfect sense, by the way, to do this. And that is what the court is now saying. Oh, indeed, there was plenty of stuff happening, as you may remember, to more than justify what the National Guard was sent there to do, especially when you, by the way, have the LAPD admitting on camera they don't have the situation under control. But, Trump's being a dictator by doing this. Okay, well, Gavin, you could have actually cooperated and said, hey, also, I want to deploy the National Guard as well. But as you can see, so that's what the court is saying. A lower court judge earlier had concluded that the protests, yes, this is what he was trying to argue, were not severe enough for Mr. Trump to use a rarely triggered law to federalize the National Guard over Newsom's objections. But the panel, which included, yes, 2 appointees of Trump, but also 1 former of President Joe Biden, disagreed with the lower court. Here's what they said in their 38-page ruling, which again, I will reiterate, it was a common sense decision to do so. As a matter of fact, I would say it was crazy not to deploy the National Guard in that situation. And this is, frankly, a pretty important court ruling because, hey, now, right, the precedent must be set. just because a lunatic, crazy, far-left governor wants half their city to be burnt down, it shouldn't have to go that way, right? But they went on here to say, quote, affording appropriate deference to the president's determination, we conclude that he likely acted within his authority in federalizing the National Guard, the court wrote in an unsigned opinion on behalf of the entire panel. The ruling was not a surprise. During a 65-minute hearing on Tuesday, the panel's questions and statements had telegraphed that all three judges were inclined to let Mr. Trump keep controlling the National Guard while litigation plays out over California. Mr. Trump has praised the decision, saying in a Truth Social post that we'll show you here in a second, that it supported his argument for using the National Guard all over the U.S. if law enforcement locally cannot get the job done. Mr. Newsom, in a response on Thursday, focused on how the appeals court had rejected the Trump administration's argument that a president's decision to federalize the National Guard could not be reviewed by a judge. Okay, but they did review it, by the way, here. Okay, so you're focusing on one part of this. No, they did review it. And what did they ultimately here say? In the case that there is rioting going on in the streets, it's pretty justified, right? But anyways, that's apparently what you have here going on. A Supreme Court precedent, as you can see here, does not compel us to accept the federal government's position that the president could federalize National Guard based on no evidence whatsoever. The court would have to review it or whatever. But as you can see here, the judges did go on here to say the violent actions of some protesters in Los Angeles had hindered immigration enforcement. That is true, by the way. Again, the National Guard was primarily to protect immigration officers, and that was sufficient for the judiciary to defer to Mr. Trump's decision to invoke the call-up statute. Whoa. The appeals court further went on to also reject the state's contention, California there, that the call-up order was illegal because Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, sent the directive to a general in charge of the National Guard. Even though the statute says that the edict must go through the governor, the court said that the general was Newsom's agent and that was good enough. Even if there was a procedural violation, that would not justify the scope of relief provided by the district court, stripping Mr. Trump of the control of the guard. The state could choose to ask the full appeals court to rehear, or it could ask the Supreme Court to intervene, but the state also might just move on from the current part of the dispute since, the situation is basically over now. And by the way, if the Supreme Court ends up making a ruling, given the balance of the Supreme Court, I'm not exactly sure it'll go in Newsom's favor.
If I was in California's legal position here, I would tell the governor, you don't want to appeal this. You don't want to bring this up to the Supreme Court. Yes, you have the option to ask them to take it. That's your sort of last best chance here. But I think you're going to lose, California. I think if you look at this opinion, it was a 3-0 unanimous opinion from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. You had 2 Trump appointees and a Biden appointee on that court. I don't see any way any of the 6 conservatives on the Supreme Court say, sure, a trial-level district judge can overrule the president on this issue just because he disagrees. I even think some of the liberals might join with the conservatives on this, as we saw with the Biden appointee. So it's an interesting strategic decision. If they do bring it up to the Supreme Court, California, and if the Supreme Court rules again in favor of the Trump administration, then that's going to be nationwide binding, an even bigger loss for California.
We've seen some disappointing decisions, but still, in a case where you even have the Biden judge here in agreement, yeah, it's pretty freaking common sense. He's the commander-in-chief of the military. If there is more than the justification to do so, which there clearly was, then what do you expect? Here, by the way, guys, is a clip recently out of the House as California Representative Kevin Kiley, who used to be a local state legislature there, actually makes the argument for himself. As we've been pointing out here, the central claim by Gavin Newsom was essentially, we should not believe our own eyes, despite the fact that the National Guard is being deployed for a fairly reasonable decision. No, do not believe what everyone was seeing. And, at a certain degree, when you look at Newsom's statement about, we actually won in court. No, I think to a large extent, you're starting to see the gaslighting, even for Newsom, can only go so far.
Over the last few days, the country has been shocked by the horrifying images coming out of Los Angeles. But what is also shocking is the brazenly false statements made by the governor of California. Governor Newsom has asked us not to believe our eyes, not to believe the scenes that we are all seeing of officers being attacked, of cars being lit on fire, of roadways being blocked. The governor has claimed that everything was fine, everything was perfect, until the National Guard arrived. Now, this is completely inaccurate. as a matter of the timeline. Things had spun out of control well before the Guard got there. That's why the Guard was called in. But it is also deeply offensive to attack the men and women in our National Guard by claiming that their presence has somehow catalyzed this violence. The governor owes an apology to the men and women in our National Guard who are serving our state and our country. He owes an apology to the people of Los Angeles for his role in egging on the riots. But the good news is, if there's any good news at all, that I do believe the people of California have had enough. There is a coalition for common sense emerging in our state, and I do believe we will return sanity and safety to our communities. I yield back.
By the way, guys, I should just casually find out in other news, Gavin Newsom himself, after he got humiliated in court basically several times now in his battle against the Trump administration, that apparently he has also been busted here in French Laundry Scandal 2.0. Remember back in 2020, right? He's saying, oh, COVID mandates, all this stuff. And then there he is at the French Laundry without a mask, just living it up. Well, apparently, the Saturday where this all was beginning to start, Gavin Newsom was caught attending a swanky wine tasting in the Napa Valley while rioters were actively setting fire to Los Angeles and assaulting law enforcement. This is revealed here by the City Journal. The guy abandoned Americans to party with his wife yet again. This is a dereliction of duty. Yeah, absolutely. So this apparently took place, yes, on June 7th as rioters, as you can see on the right side of your screen, were already causing massive destruction on the streets of California's largest city. Here is Gavin Newsom at the not French Laundry, but apparently in Napa Valley. Just having a great dandy old time, right? It really does beg the question, by the way, when Newsom, of course, goes on to basically make the argument that, oh, nothing was happening, everything is fine, don't believe your eyes. Well, when this was the guy who was doing it, right? You know, he had no idea of what he's there tasting wine. No wonder he thought everything was fine. He's like, yeah, stuff is happening down south in LA. Here in Napa Valley, everything's peaceful. I don't see any riots, right? Unfreaking believable, okay? So Gavin Newsom apparently just is allergic to avoiding these scandals. Like, he just always finds a way to keep burying himself in them. Donald Trump, by the way, had this response to say. He says, quote, big win in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on the president's core power to call in the National Guard. The judges obviously realize that Gavin Newsom is incompetent and ill-prepared, but this is much bigger than Gavin because all over the U.S., if our cities and our people need protection, we are the ones to give it to them should local and state police be unable, for whatever reason, to get the job done. This is a great decision for our country, and we will continue to protect and defend law-abiding Americans. Congratulations to the Ninth Circuit. America is proud of you tonight. And yes, absolutely right. This is frankly a extremely important court decision in the sense, right, that if this trend continues and you keep getting the harassment of ICE officers, you keep getting civil unrest every time that the Trump administration tries to engage in deportations, yes, it is a great open question. What is going to be the response there, right? Are you going to have the inability for ICE officers to basically do their job? Do they have to be at the mercy of violent rioters and terrorists and criminals who are literally trying to harm them physically, actively in the streets? Or does the federal government have the common sensibility to go in, as was argued in the court, and protect federal interests? Yes, if federal officers are at risk, you can actually send in other forms of federal guard, that being the National Guard, the military, under the president's, jurisdiction there, to go in and protect their very lives. Because, I think it's clearly obvious at this point that that's the agenda of the Democrats. They're saying, oh, you shouldn't wear a mask, right? They're trying to pass a law right now in California to force law enforcement to show their faces under all circumstances. And then, oh, yeah, sure, people might be throwing rocks at you, throwing fireworks, as was reported before, but no National Guard, right? You shouldn't be under the protection. Literally, that is exactly what they're trying to put these ICE officers in danger. And that's why, again, guys, this court ruling is so, so important. But if Gavin Newsom has such a problem with it, well, feel free to go to the French Laundry again. Feel free to show up to the wine tasting. I'm sure he just head in the clouds, has no idea, totally clueless as to what is going on. And have to say, no matter how sharp he may be as a politician, I think one of the big problems he's going to face in 2028 is if this stuff catches up to him, right? If it's effectively used against him, It doesn't matter how slick you are, how shifty you are, right? Over time, you just keep having this brazen of disregard for reality that everyone can obviously see, including, by the way, claiming you won a court case that you obviously lost. Yeah, that type of stuff can come back to bite you. But with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.